The biggest problem with RWBY Volume 2 is that nothing really amounted to anything. New characters like Neptune and Team Coffee either don't do much or irreparably break the tension in the series. The bridge gets completely forgotten by the time Volume 4 comes around. The increased Atlesian presence doesn't actually happen, it's just the same across Volumes 2 and 3. Even Torchwick getting captured doesn't amount to anything because Neo snuck on board the ship in Volume 3, and it's not far-fetched to think Torchwick could have done the same. There's a lot of bad and pointless scenes in Volume 2, and I'm going to talk about 10 of them. The first scene actually has one of my favorite lines in it, where Torchwick states what he's been doing, but he did all this off-screen after an entire volume of being treated like a scrub. No explanation why a huntsman hasn't shut him down yet. Tuxin's assassination doesn't mean anything because there's another White Fang deserter at Beacon that none of these characters ever address. And all the dust door robberies don't affect anything. We never see any of the characters struggling to stay supplied. We never see any of the professors talking about dust shortages or prices. Nobody has ever run out of ammunition in the series. Hell, there's only a few times we ever see anyone reload. All of this leads to this entire subplot being pointless. The second scene comes into focus in the third episode, but also affects several other episodes in Volumes 2 and 3. Where exactly is the CCT in relation to everything else? Ruby and Weiss go out of their way to go to the CCT, which is apparently on the Beacon campus, but it's also not. If it was, that would mean Ruby would see it literally every day. Take it from someone who actually does live in a city with a massive monument, the largest monument if I'm not mistaken. After a few times, it would lose its luster. So they don't make the call from the library because Ruby wanted to see something she sees every day anyway, and what makes it worse is all the stuff with Penny in this episode. She's so under wraps that she's able to freely walk around Beacon campus all by herself. But then a quick walk later and she and Ruby are somewhere in Vale, and none of this makes any sense because Schrödinger CCT is nowhere to be found in any other establishing shot at Beacon or Vale unless it's also Beacon Tower, in which case, why not call it Beacon Tower like they do every other time? The next scene defines pointlessness. Yang and Neptune go to Junior's club because, let's face it, the only reason the scene exists is to pad out time reusing the set piece from a previous video. Jack Batillo, a man who literally talks for a living, gives the worst performance this side of Anne Hallam. Nothing is accomplished in the scene, we get no insight to any of the characters, and Yang has no reason to think he knows anything because she knows Torchwick is working with the White Fang now, not Junior's group. Plus, he didn't know anything the last time Yang showed up either. The fourth scene is Pura vs. Cardinal, which embodies every single grievance I have with Monty's fight scenes. And I know this was made by Shane Newville, but my point still stands. There's no sense of weight, no passion or emotion in the fighters' faces or movements. There's very little context, and what context does exist is so mind-bendingly stupid that you're better off just outright ignoring it. The commentary says it's a qualifier round, which means in order to qualify you have to beat an entire team of lightweights. Why? And if there's any kind of qualifier whatsoever, then how in the Flying Dutchman did John ever make it into the tournament? Also, qualifying as an individual is beyond counterproductive considering the first round of the tournament is a freaking team deathmatch. The scene once again says nothing about the characters or world. It's not cathartic because we've barely seen Russell, Dove, or Sky, and Cardin more or less already got his comeuppance during Volume 1. And before you say, but it's fun, it's not. Seeing the hero struggle and achieve victory is fun. Seeing a close match is fun. Learning something about the characters through their actions is fun. Progressing the plot through action is fun. This scene does none of those things. It is the epitome of a boring, pointless fight. The fifth scene has the opposite problem. Ruby vs. Cinder just looks awful. The characters just kind of float around. Cinder's run cycle is hilariously bad. Her mask pops on and off in between cuts when she's fighting the guards. Whoever animated this apparently didn't get the memo that Ruby isn't supposed to walk in heels. And the only bit in this fight I like is Cinder's little twirl with the bow. Other than that, it's just the sloppiest looking fight in the volume. And this fight leads into the next bad scene. It's really just a line. The dumbest line in the volume. Save for the glass, it sounds exactly like the person we fought the night we met Ruby. I mean, Glinda's technically right, it is the same person. But Ruby didn't describe Cinder's hair, eyes, or her sweet ass. She described her power, which is completely different than the power set Cinder displayed back in Volume 1. Glinda has no reason to make this connection, and it's just a contrived way to get to the next part of the volume. The last four scenes have very simple things wrong with them. The seventh scene is when Ruby gets kidnapped. This is the first time her inability to fight without Crescent Rose has ever been hinted at, and it contradicts previous fights like the very first fight scene in Volume 1. where she took down at least 2 goons before drawing her weapon, and the food fight where she took down all of Team Juniper just by running really fast. RWBY is fast enough to create wind tunnels and strong enough to swing a giant scythe like it's a broomstick, so a single punch from RWBY should send the scrub into the stratosphere. And that's not mentioning how the subplot comes back into play later, while also being outright ignored depending on the scene. The 8th scene is the one where they split up on the train. A show that's supposed to be about teamwork, yet never once displays teamwork, spends the second to last episode in a volume, splitting the team up with no rhyme or reason because the director had a few one-on-one fights he wanted to shoehorn in. There's no good reason why they couldn't just derail the train, no good reason why they fed the White Fang goons to the Grim, no good reason they couldn't just all run along the top and blast through everything as a team, no good reason to let Yang fight Neo alone, and no good reason why Torchwick survived the train crash despite being completely unconscious and in the front of the train when it crashed. And that goes double for Weiss, who got knocked out and then took a chainsaw to the back and somehow survived because this was back when Aura was passive and before Volume 5 retconned it to be active. The 9th scene is the breach, which I've ragged on before. Like I said, watching the hero struggle but achieve victory through determination or cleverness is fun. Watching a group of background characters tear through an army of monsters said to be humanity's greatest threat isn't fun. Watching things compound, building and progressing as the characters grow as people and fighters is fun. Watching a show where one of the volume finales gets swept under the rug isn't. Team RWBY are a non-presence in this fight. Sean takes down an Ursa smaller than the one he took down before, and that's supposed to be seen as a massive moment for him. And the Atlesian Knights don't even really contribute, yet they're the ones who get all the credit and not the second years who took out most of the Grim in a handful of seconds. This scene broke all the tension the show could have mustered. It's so bad that they had to nerf every single character and put the Grim into overdrive just to have the inkling of tension in Volume 3. And speaking of retcons, the final scene I'm going to talk about is the post-credit scene. A scene so important, it literally didn't happen. Yang didn't meet Raven until Volume 5. She never mentions having a dream about her. Raven still hasn't actually given a reason to why she left in the first place, and the scene only exists to set up something so important the writers completely forgot about it and decided to leave her entire role in Volume 3 on the cutting room floor. So yeah, those were the 10 worst scenes in Volume 2. There were a couple scenes I decided to keep off the list because they didn't add to the overall problem of Volume 2. So next time, I'll be taking a look at the 10 worst scenes in RWBY Volume 1. I'm Mediocrity4. Thanks for watching.